Hello everyone, welcome back to Extract the Fact. I'm your host, Adam Israelovitz. So today is going to be our first historical video. I'm going to look at both sides to a polarizing opinion based on history. History is one of my favorite subjects in school, so I'm excited to launch this aspect of the program today, and I think it gives kind of a unique lens to what we're trying to do here at Extract the Fact. And obviously history directly influences the present, so I think some of these topics are really useful for today's political climate, and I'm excited to jump right in. So today we're going to be assessing Ronald Reagan's foreign policy. Obviously Reagan is a pretty divisive president, but we're going to look at both sides, those who support Reagan's foreign policy and those who are against it. This is a topic I did in my US history class in school, so I'm really excited to take what I know. I did some more research, and I'm excited to let you guys see what you guys think today. So we're going to look at both sides to Ronald Reagan's foreign policy. So let's just jump right in. So first I'm going to be arguing that Ronald Reagan's foreign policy was a failure. So I'm going to do one was a failure, one was a success, and now I'll present the arguments that Ronald Reagan's foreign policy was in fact a failure for America. Now, before we look at anything regarding Ronald Reagan, it is important when we're assessing foreign policy, the first thing that I look for when I'm looking at foreign policy is I look at trust. So I'm saying, does this president and does the government behind the president and Reagan, is there trust that is built between inside government, inside the United States government, and between the United States government and between foreign powers? So because a lot of agreements and a lot of deals are predicated on this trust, that is the most essential part, I think, and that's what furthers American hegemony, and that's what furthers American influence in the global arena. So let's just look at that from that lens. That's how we assess foreign policy. So the main criticism regarding Ronald Reagan's foreign policy is within developing nations. So we're going to look at how Reagan's belief in American exceptionalism as an ideologue in fact blinded his foreign policy from creating substantive change in developing areas of the world. So that's kind of the main critique on Reagan. So we look at, for example, the Iran-Contra affair, which was a massive foreign policy failure where members of the National Security Council under Reagan engaged in secret weapons negotiations with Iran in order to funnel these weapons profits to arm anti-communist and human rights violating Contras in Nicaragua. So this is a huge scandal and one of the major blemishes on President Reagan's record. The first thing people point to is always this infamous Iran-Contra scandal. In addition, after a bombing of the U.S. Embassy in Beirut killed 17 Americans, and as well as then an explosion occurred from a Lebanese terrorist group, Hezbollah, that killed another 240 U.S. troops at a military base. So that was obviously a devastating blow inside the Middle East for American influence. And to divert attention from the disaster, Reagan ordered an invasion of American troops inside a Caribbean island that was Marxist, of Grenada. And Reagan claimed that this invasion was to protect Americans, but a lot of the people who argue against Reagan would say it was just a coup to develop U.S. power in the area, and over 20 U.S. troops were killed in the invasion. In addition, this is another common thread throughout the Cold War period, but Reagan really developed it, how he armed authoritarian regimes and human rights violators in El Salvador and Efrain Reyes Montt in Guatemala. And this is critics of Reagan will say he constantly supported brutality, and as an ideologue, because he loved capitalism so much and this rugged individualism that America promotes, that it came at the expense of promoting authoritarians over communism. And this goes against the idealistic image of America as like a beacon of hope, because we're in fact arming the people who suppress democracy to the highest extent. And finally, this is more of an economic argument against Reagan, but people point to his Strategic Defense Initiative, or SDI, which was an ineffective defense system to counter ballistic missiles. And he actually spent $209 billion on the project without formally testing it on a large scale. It was that big of a failure, and it also stalled negotiations at the Reykjavik summit with Gorbachev. So that was a massive economic failure as well. So that is those are the main arguments against President Reagan's foreign policy. So now we're going to look why many people think he was a huge success for America. So the success argument is kind of twofold. One is President Reagan's rhetoric, and one is President Reagan's actual policies and what he actually did. So first, let's look at the rhetorical lens of President Reagan. And many people see after he came, proponents of Reagan will argue after President Carter, America was in need of a strong leader after the Iranian hostage crisis. So there was a huge need for that strong leader that America desperately needed, and they think Reagan really filled that role well. So we see he was known as the great communicator. Reagan was an actor before he was a politician. He was an actor, then he was governor of California, and then he was the president of the United States. And as president of the United States, they called him the great communicator. And on June 12th, 1987, he gave his speech at the Brandenburg Gate, where he famously said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." That was a hugely unifying speech for Western culture and democratic force. And Gorbachev eventually listened, the Berlin Wall came down, and the rest is history. Now, that was his unifying aspect, and although that wasn't a policy, Americans really felt like he was a leader that really promoted democratic change inside the Soviet Union and inside China as well. We also look at the Peace Through Strength initiative that people point to as a huge success. Reagan upped the United States defense budget from 116 to an average of $263 billion over his 8 years as president. So many people saw this build up from 116 to $263 billion over his 8 years as president as a huge step up, and it really furthered America's trust within the country, and it promoted their power throughout the world as well. He usually never used the military. It was rather just as a force against the Soviet Union. In addition, we look at his diplomatic summits that Reagan pioneered with President Gorbachev, from the Geneva Summit of 1985 to the Reykjavik Summit of 1986, and finally the INF Treaty of 1987. Reagan, throughout his second term, really abandoned his aggressive rhetoric and turned it into diplomatic action that greatly reduced the Soviets' nuclear arms and was the start of the end of the Cold War, which people point to as a huge benefit. In addition, with China, Reagan met Premier Zhao Ziyang at a state dinner in Washington in 1984, and he discussed the Taiwanese arms sale. And this meeting really furthered the connection between the United States and China after Nixon's visit to China. And this new economic outlook really furthered them as a premier trade partner with China, and that was a huge benefit as well. So those are the two sides. I'm excited to hear what you guys think, because I think Reagan is one of the most talked about presidents in our era, and for good reason, because there's a ton that happened under Reagan, and there's really just there's so much that Reagan did, and I think it's a really truly fascinating president to study. And remember how I look at foreign policy. I think it's a good way to look at foreign policy. Everything is predicated on trust. So when you look at these summits and these treaties, everything that was before that, such as the Peace Through Strength initiative, that is all predicated on this trust. So that's how I look at past presidents, and I'm curious to see what you guys think. So comment below, and thank you.